Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where corsets are common, decorum is dense, and public fainting is a perfectly acceptable punctuation mark in conversation. Welcome to Victorian London, the city of fog, formality, and frequent falling over. You stand at your parlor window, staring into the evening mist. It rolls down the cobbled streets like a gentle tide, curling around gas lamps that flicker as though gossiping. Your reflection in the glass is dim, elongated by the smudge of soot and the slow fade of sunlight. You're dressed, of course. One must always be dressed, with starched collar, waistcoat, gloves, and a cravat tied so tightly around your neck it feels more symbolic than necessary. Your top hat, recently brushed, is perched with mathematical precision. You nod at your own reflection. Yes, you look like someone who might faint stylishly. The thing is, fainting is not a weakness here. It's a weather report. A touch of the vapors, your aunt murmured earlier over tea, when you swayed slightly from the sheer weight of social expectations. You replied only with a courteous blink and continued spooning sugar into your cup, 12 dainty cubes deep. This is not a world built for the robust. The Victorian gentleman is not a man of unshakable stamina. He is a man of polite ailments, of pastel nerves, of philosophical digestion. You are him. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far this little time machine of a channel travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lace up your boots, though really, they're more decorative than functional, and prepare to brave the street. You step into the fog with the soft crunch of gravel underfoot. Everything smells vaguely of coal smoke, lavender soap, and someone's recently overcooked pheasant. The air is thick, and you are delicate. It's not just you. Everyone's fragile. The entire city is one hard sniff away from collapsing into a handkerchief. London in the 1800s is a place of formal courtesies and informal collapses. People faint in churches, on carriages, in queues, during conversations, and once, famously, while choosing wallpaper. Even your neighbor, a respected barrister with a chin like a shovel, keeled over just last week after catching a glimpse of his own tailor's invoice. There's a theory making the rounds that modern life is simply too stimulating. Too many telegrams, too many political speeches, too many new flavors of biscuit. Historians still argue whether this general public faintiness was rooted more in fashion, nutrition, or pure social theater. But one thing's certain, you wouldn't last 5 minutes here without some sort of smelling salt. You pass a fruit vendor, who bows slightly. You nod, nearly lose balance, and grasp the edge of a lamppost like it's a long-lost lover. The vendor doesn't react. Just yesterday, someone fainted into his plum display. He shrugs and continues stacking pears like they're waiting for Judgment Day. You continue onward. Your goal? Not to faint before reaching the chemist, where you've been promised a new tincture said to fortify one's constitution while preserving the right level of poetic misery. But the fog is heavy tonight, thick as gossip. Your lungs are working overtime just to separate oxygen from melancholia. Your thoughts feel like they've been dipped in syrup. Somewhere nearby, a horse snorts in agreement. And then it happens. A woman across the street gasps. She's seen a man in a slightly scandalous ascot. She clutches her parasol like a sword and leans backward just so. Her knees bend in harmony. She faints with the balletic grace of someone who's practiced. Her landing is cushioned by a conveniently placed passerby, who is himself so used to this social choreography that he simply sighs and adjusts his monocle. You tip your hat in solemn appreciation, 10 out of 10. It's important you remind yourself not just that one faints, but how one faints. With dignity, with flair, with at least 3 witnesses, preferably including someone from the clergy. As you trudge onward, a gentle breeze picks up. It whispers through your waistcoat and sends your cravat fluttering. You take a breath, only to remember that breathing is a bit of a luxury these days. The air, though rich in character, is poor in actual usefulness. Up ahead, a newsboy shouts the headlines. Something about a scandal involving turnips and the Prime Minister's niece. The boy sneezes mid-shout and stumbles dramatically. He's learning early. A gentleman to your right huffs at the paper's content, rolls his eyes, and promptly sits down on the curb with a theatrical oof. You glance around. Two ladies watching him simultaneously deploy their fans and mutter something about delicate nerves. You're surrounded by professionals, and you are one of them. You reach the apothecary at last, its window fogged from within. The bell above the door tinkles faintly as you enter, and the warmth washes over you like a quilt woven from cinnamon and pharmacy-grade denial. The apothecary is a man of indeterminate age, with a beard that has clearly outlived several regimes. He doesn't speak. He simply hands you a small paper packet and nods. You nod back, trying not to pass out from the intensity of the eye contact. Inside the packet is something powdery, floral, and vaguely medicinal. Possibly chamomile, possibly crushed regret. You pocket it without asking questions. Victorian remedies are less about effectiveness and more about maintaining the illusion of effort. You exit into the fog once more, packet in pocket, spine politely wilting. Another block to home. Just one more. But your knees have other ideas. They send a brief resignation letter to your ankles, who immediately forward it to the hips. Your vision narrows to a tunnel. You whisper a single word, respectable, and then the pavement rushes up to meet you like a long-lost dance partner. You come to in a surprisingly comfortable position. Your head rests against something soft, a bundled wool coat perhaps, or the carefully folded lap of a passing clergyman. The world swims back into view in gentle waves of grayish fog and over-applied rosewater. A concerned pigeon watches you from a nearby windowsill. You blink, and it blinks back. No one panics. This is Victorian London, after all. Fainting in public is about as shocking as yawning mid-sermon. Still, it's best to act quickly before someone assumes you've died of ennui. You sit up with a practiced flutter of the eyelashes and murmur something about a sudden attack of civilized fragility, a phrase that means everything and nothing. You're helped to your feet by a passing baker's assistant who looks barely old enough to shave, but already carries himself like a man who's fainted twice in line for meat pies. He pats you gently on the shoulder, nods solemnly, and continues on his flour-dusted way. You make a mental note to tip your hat next time you pass his shop. And now you adjust your cravat. Ah yes, the cravat, the symbol of your standing, your noose of nobility, your silken choke collar of upper-class aspiration. Historians still argue whether the Victorian cravat was more a fashion statement or a strangulation challenge wrapped in paisley. Yours is currently the culprit of your earlier pavement appointment. Tied in the waterfall ascot style, it's both dazzlingly stylish and a minor threat to respiratory autonomy. You recall the morning's tying process vividly. 20 minutes in front of your parlor mirror, a copy of Beau Brummell's monthly manual of male magnificence, balanced precariously on your knee. One wrong loop and you'd look like an overwrapped ham. But perfection comes at a price. As you walk, more cautiously now, you pass two gentlemen deep in a cravat duel, each subtly out-tying the other. One's cravat glows with the effort of 12 layers and 3 strategically placed pearls. The other appears to be wearing a small library of embroidered silk. They nod in mutual respect. Then one coughs delicately and sits on a bench. It's like watching knights joust, if the lances were made of fabric and everyone was too winded to mount a horse. You reach a small mirror hung on the side of a hatter's shop and peer in. Your cravat is askew. This is unacceptable. You find a quiet stoop and begin the delicate process of retying it. First, a soft tug, then a strategic twist, a half knot, a double tuck, a minor prayer to the household gods of fashion. You finally arrive at a satisfactory look, a style you privately call the melancholy swan. Of course, the tighter the cravat, the more fainting-friendly you become. It's an equation of elegance. Elegance, tension layering, lung capacity. The top minds of the day, including a few confused mathematicians, have all but confirmed it. Cravats weren't always so perilous. Earlier in the century, a gentleman might simply wrap a bit of linen around his throat and call it a day. But as the Victorian aesthetic evolved, so too did the expectation that your neckwear reflect your entire inner moral compass. A cravat had to say, I am dashing but restrained, wealthy but soulful, just on the verge of emotional collapse, but in a tasteful way. Cravat manuals were published. Cravat societies were formed. It was said that a man could rise or fall in society based entirely on the symmetry of his folds. some folded to the left, others the right. A few brave souls experimented with diagonal cravattery, most of whom were banned from garden parties for life. The Ladies' Fashion Gazette once claimed, "A well-tied cravat is the moral backbone of a gentleman," which might explain why your own spine tends to give out halfway through dinner. There are, of course, accessories. You pass a dandy sporting a sapphire-crusted cravat pin shaped like a fainting couch. He winks at you. His knees look weak. It's contagious. You consider visiting Madame Norcross's haberdashery around the corner. She's rumored to carry imported French silk, thin as fog and twice as difficult. The kind of fabric that flutters even when you're standing still, that whispers of revolution and poor impulse control. Dangerous stuff. But you hesitate. Too many new textures in one day, and you'll need a 3-hour lie-down. Instead, you pause at a street vendor hawking cravat stiffeners, each labeled with increasingly unhinged promises. Maintain the majesty of your neck. Guaranteed to impress bishops and butlers. So stiff you'll pass out standing. You buy one for research. Sliding it into your cravat, you feel the difference instantly. Your posture improves, your voice deepens, you briefly consider writing a sonnet. And then, predictably, your vision narrows again. You remove the stiffener with the panic of someone disarming a fashionable explosive. A nearby chimney sweep watches the whole process with interest. You nod, he nods. Mutual recognition of the human condition. Cravats are the great equalizer. Back home, you retire to your fainting chair. Not just any chair. The chair. Upholstered in floral brocade and angled perfectly toward the fireplace. You installed it after reading in the Gentleman's Illustrated Fainting Quarterly that a man should always swoon toward the light source. You've tested this. It holds true. You remove your cravat slowly. It flutters onto your lap like a silk-based sigh. And you breathe. Ah, that feeling. When your trachea regains ownership of its own real estate. When your chin can touch your chest without alerting the footman. You sip your tea, lukewarm, oversteeped, just the way it wasn't intended. Your lungs expand like parasols. Historians will never agree whether Victorian fashion was a genuine cultural expression or a long-form prank designed to thin the population. But you understand the truth. It was both. And in either case, you were always meant to look good doing it, even while unconscious. Your day winds down with a final cravatless sigh. Just you, your fainting chair, and a pigeon still judging you from the window. As all proper Victorian mornings should with a cough. Not yours, thankfully, but that of your butler, Reginald, discreetly clearing his throat just outside your bedchamber, signaling that your bathwater has reached an acceptably tepid state and that your boiled egg awaits its ceremonial cracking. You stretch like a hibernating lemur and sit up, blinking through the lace-curtained dawn. A light fog seeps through the windowsill. Somewhere in the distance, a milkman curses quietly at a goose. You dress slowly, shirt first, then undershirt, then, controversially, another shirt. A third layer for moral fortitude. Waistcoat, trousers, stockings, garters, optional but encouraged. And finally, the boots, buttoned all the way to your sole. Then you pause at the mirror. Your mustache, thin but persistent, has curled upward in defiance. You respect its independence but require conformity. A dab of wax, a flick of the wrist, and it returns to its assigned duties, smirking politely above your tea and twitching faintly at off-color jokes. It is time to visit your club. The Gentlemen's Society for the Preservation of Dignified Collapse, Wednesdays only, no poets, meets promptly at 11. You arrive fashionably early at 11:37, greeted by a doorman who eyes your cravat with suspicion and offers you a pamphlet on nasal breathing for extended wakefulness. You take it out of pity. Inside, the club is a haven of fainting-friendly architecture. Chairs with velvet headrests, lounges long enough to sprawl without entanglement. A chaise longue in every corner, often occupied by men delicately fanning themselves with old banknotes. The walls are lined with mahogany bookcases and portraits of past members, all mid-swoon. You recognize Sir Huxley of Hammersmith in one of the oil paintings, collapsed dramatically across a billiards table, monocle still clinging to his cheek. Legend says he once fainted while tying his shoe and woke up a baron. Today's meeting begins with a reading from The Etiquette of Elegant Unconsciousness, an anonymous guidebook rumored to be penned by Queen Victoria's own personal valet. The current passage discusses acceptable sounds to make while fainting. A polite gasp, encouraged. A modest oh, traditional. A dramatic sigh resembling a deflating souffle, fashionable in Paris. Anything louder than a sheep sneeze, unforgivably vulgar. You take notes, or rather, you intend to. Your pencil rolls lazily out of your glove and onto the rug, and by the time you've reached for it, the urge to nap has overtaken you. You recline. That's when Colonel Pembroke arrives. The Colonel is known across 4 counties for having fainted during every major event of his adult life. His wife's funeral, his 3rd wedding, the unveiling of a particularly aggressive wallpaper design. Today he regales the room with tales of his recent duel with a garden hedge. It lunged, he insists, voice trembling. Boxwood, but with ambition. I barely escaped with my honor. There are murmurs of sympathy. Someone offers him a sip of lavender tonic. Someone else swoons in solidarity. Historians still argue whether Victorian clubs served any true political purpose, or whether they were simply elaborate schemes for public lounging. But here, surrounded by genteel collapsers and fainting couches shaped like philosophical statements, you know the truth. This is where the real work gets done. The work of perfecting the art of momentary absence. You drift in and out of conversation, sipping tea brewed with more milk than actual leaf, and nibbling on a biscuit so dry it qualifies as dust. The club's cook believes flavor is a distraction. A heated debate breaks out over the etiquette of fainting on public transport. Lord Fenwick argues that the omnibus is too cramped for a proper descent. Lady Bellingworth, allowed in on a technicality and her husband's monocle, insists that swooning dramatically across multiple laps is an assertion of one's social radius. You side with Lady Bellingworth. There's something theatrical about draping yourself diagonally across strangers while apologizing with your eyelashes. By mid-afternoon, you excuse yourself to the club's conservatory of repose, a sun-dappled room filled with ferns, wicker chairs, and the occasional napping archivist. You lower yourself onto a settee embroidered with the phrase, "Mind the languor." And then it strikes, that peculiar sensation, the tightening of the temples, the gentle swim of vision, the distant echo of your own name, possibly shouted by Reginald back at home for reasons unknown. You've pushed your limits. Cravat still intact, you exhale, recline, and surrender to the moment. Here in the conservatory, surrounded by the soft whisper of leaves and the subtle scent of Parma violets, your faint is an act of quiet rebellion against the pace of the world, against industrial progress, against steam engines and punctuality and telegrams arriving mid-sentence. You let it all go. Somewhere nearby, a clock chimes 3. A gentleman drops his spoon. Another inhales sharply and whispers, "Respect." Fainting here is not weakness. It's a form of protest, a performance, an art, and you are, if nothing else, an artist. Eventually, the soft rustle of newspaper page and the scent of warm starch guide you gently back to consciousness. You rise with the grace of a sleeping cat and make your way home, nodding respectfully to the Colonel, who is now semi-reclined in a potted palm. Back in your quarters, you remove your boots using the patented boot slide assist contraption installed last spring after an unfortunate faint mid-lace. You sink into your fainting chair once more, heart full, lungs half functional, and soul entirely at peace. Because in this world, where strength is loud and stoicism celebrated, you have chosen a different path. A quieter one, a gentler one, a silk-lined, occasionally unconscious one. And it suits you just fine. It's a Thursday, which means one thing in your social calendar. The Grand Society of Victorian Perambulators is meeting for its weekly constitutional. You dress accordingly. The perambulation uniform demands a particular kind of flair, something between minor nobility on a budget and melancholy professor recently ghosted by a governess. You opt for your maroon walking coat with the faint moth hole, right sleeve, discreetly patched with regret, a polished cane carved to resemble a dodo, and a hat so wide-brimmed it interferes with other people's umbrellas. But more importantly, you choose your fainting cape. Ah yes, the fainting cape. That sweeping garment of theatrical drapery, made for swooning, collapsing, and, if absolutely necessary, shielding oneself from direct sunlight and unsolicited conversation. Yours is made of velvet, lined in satin, and vaguely smells of your Aunt Margaret's parlor. It's perfect. You meet your fellow perambulators just outside St. Botolph's swooning green. There are 9 of you today, a modest turnout due to last week's unfortunate incident involving a misidentified daffodil and Lord Featherstone's tragic stumble into a decorative fountain. As you begin your walk, you fall into step beside Dr. Alistair Bimble, a man whose beard alone has written 3 books. Today he's rambling gently about the benefits of breathing through one's left nostril. You nod with interest and silently resolve to test this after tea. The group moves slowly, partly for elegance, partly because half the attendees own knees older than the Crimean War. There's a soft rustle of fabric and the occasional, "Oh, do mind the puddle," but otherwise, it's a serene affair. You pass by the apothecary, where an apprentice is chalking restorative syrups, buy 2, faint 1 free onto the board. You briefly consider stopping in, but last time you purchased a bottle of Dr. Tizzleberry's Nerve Elixir, it turned out to be mostly beetroot and regret. The conversation meanders like the walk itself. Topics include the ideal density of a fainting cushion between overcooked pudding and a shocked badger, whether one should faint forwards or backwards on cobbled streets. Backwards wins for dramatic value, forwards for ease of retrieval. The social acceptability of swooning in art galleries, permitted only if the art is French, melancholy, or contains at least 1 cherub. You contribute a story from last Tuesday involving an unexpected collapse in front of the fishmonger. The cause? A particularly well-groomed haddock. The group nods solemnly. We've all been there. Now, around the halfway point of the perambulation, you reach the bench. Every neighborhood has one. That sacred resting spot for weary walkers and deliberate fainters. It's positioned perfectly, part sun, part shade, with a slight lean for comfort and scandal. Rumor says Queen Victoria herself once paused there to retie her emotional stability. You take your turn seated, theatrically. There's a protocol, of course. 1, lower oneself slowly, as if the bench might be offended by sudden contact. 2, drape your cape over the armrest, letting it spill like spilled ink. 3, sigh just once, through your nose, not your mouth. Anything more is French. As you rest, your mind wanders to an earlier age of walking, before sidewalks, when muddy streets claimed both dignity and boots. Historians still argue whether the rise of urban walking clubs was due to improved sanitation or simply because people wanted to faint somewhere other than indoors. A boy passes by, offering roasted chestnuts from a cart. You buy one. It's hot, tastes of soot and nostalgia, and almost makes you weep. But your tear ducts, like most of your internal systems, are on strike. From your spot on the bench, you observe a lady across the street attempting a solo perambulation. Her skirts are layered like geological strata, her bonnet the size of a small milliner's shop. She walks with purpose, grace, and the distinct look of someone who might collapse at any moment due to an overly tight corset and an emotional memory of a French novel. You tip your hat in solidarity. Dr. Bimble returns with a small crowd in tow, mostly enthusiasts, a few actual doctors, and 1 man who seems to be lost but is enjoying the vibe. Together you discuss posture theory. Should one keep the spine rigid to avoid crumpling like a poorly stacked pastry? Or should you embrace the slump, the natural arc of a body in decline? The debate continues. No one agrees. Everyone yawns. It's nearly time to wrap the walk. The final stretch includes the uphill climb past the bakery, where the smell of sugared buns almost undoes your knees. You steady yourself on your cane and let your breath escape in ladylike wheezes. A nearby child offers you a boiled sweet. You refuse. Boiled sugar has ruined greater men. You arrive back at the green. The sun is lower now, the pigeons more confident. One struts by with what might be a monocle in its beak. You and your companions form a circle and take turns practicing the gentle fold, a fainting method that involves a controlled descent into repose, ideally with one ankle crossed over the other and no visible panic. It's a difficult move. 2 participants accidentally perform the sideways waffle instead, which scores fewer aesthetic points but remains within club rules. Finally, you bow. Not to each other, but to the idea of walking with no destination, of strolling for the sake of it, of creating space for collapse, on benches, on lawns, in the hearts of startled milkmaids. Because this is your rebellion. In a world of schedules, of train timetables and factory bells and stern telegrams, you walk. Slowly, elegantly, occasionally flat on your back. You return home that evening with a heart full of gentle camaraderie, a lung functioning at roughly 80%, and a fresh crease in your cape that suggests character. Reginald meets you at the door with warm slippers and a note from your Aunt Victoria, inquiring whether you'll attend her fainting recital next Tuesday. She's performing a triple swoon with ribbon flourishes. You nod. You wouldn't miss it. The weekend arrives with the dignity of a mourning dove in a waistcoat. Saturday mornings in your household are sacred, devoted not to labor or productivity, but to what Victorian society lovingly refers to as ritualized idleness. You begin the day with your most taxing task, selecting the correct robe for indoor languishing. The options are daunting. There's the deep green velvet with embroidered acorns, elegant but vaguely autumnal, and the quilted burgundy number that makes you resemble a retired cardinal. You settle on the striped silk, a garment that says, "I may collapse at any moment, but I'll do it in style." Reginald appears with your morning tea and a silver tray bearing precisely 1 square of toast and half a grapefruit, the latter of which you acknowledge with the suspicion of a man unsure whether it's food or punishment. You sip, you sigh, you prepare to recline. But before your limbs can fully melt into the fainting chaise, Reginald clears his throat, a noise as delicate and ominous as a violin string snapping, and hands you a stiff envelope. It's from the Honorable Society for the Preservation of Delicate Sensibilities. You are, it seems, cordially invited to deliver a presentation at their annual symposium on gentle decline and the art of social recovery. You are to speak on the morning collapse, navigating dignity before luncheon. You drop the letter. Not from shock, but from a deep, theatrical sense of obligation. You are going to faint in front of a live audience. You spend the rest of the day in rigorous preparation. First, you consult the Manual of Graceful Disintegration by Lady Crispin of Harrogate, who famously fainted at every single toast at her wedding, including the one she gave herself. She recommends 2 core techniques, the gentle sway and the thoughtful plummet. You practice both in the hallway, using a rolled-up rug as a simulated stage and a bewildered cat as a lighting assistant. Next, you rehearse your speech. It begins, as all great speeches should, with an apology for standing. Then, you chart a historical overview of the morning faint, from its early appearances in the diaries of 18th century heiresses, usually just after breakfast, to its formal codification in the Society's Handbook of Horizontal Expression. You include a controversial footnote on tea temperature and its impact on syncope rates, which historians still argue over. Some claim lukewarm tea induces drowsiness, others insist it merely disappoints. You round it off with a live demonstration. Well, live in the sense that you will faint on purpose, which, in this crowd, is both an art and a competitive sport. The day of the symposium arrives. You are dressed in your finest, a dove-gray suit, a soft cravat with a pattern resembling wilting lilies, gloves so snug they could be mistaken for an emotional support item. You pack a fainting cushion with extra stuffing, just in case someone in the front row faints in sympathy. The symposium is held in the Grand Hall of the Temperance and Tepid Beverages Association, a venue known for its low lighting and ample chaise longues. The audience is a who's who of Victorian fragility. Lords with trembling monocles, duchesses holding smelling salts like fashion accessories, a man from Devon who once fainted at the sight of a strongly worded menu. You take the stage. You speak slowly, warmly, like molasses on a winter radiator. You describe the proper angle of descent, precisely 32 degrees from vertical, with a slight twist of the right shoulder to avoid creasing. You demonstrate it. There is polite gasping. You discuss the social implications of morning fainting, how it allows one to signal both vulnerability and status. No one faints after a bad breakfast, you explain. They faint because it was prepared by someone else. The crowd is riveted. At least 3 people are already lying down. You conclude your talk with a quote from Lord Witherby, who once fainted while reciting poetry to his horse. One should never underestimate the value of a dramatic pause, especially if it ends on the floor. And then, with exquisite timing, you perform your closing feint. It is a masterpiece. You begin with a subtle wobble, as if caught in a breeze of melancholy. Your eyes flutter, your shoulders slacken. You emit a sound, a cross between a sigh and a sonnet, and you fall, not down but into the very idea of down. Your body arranges itself delicately on the fainting rug. Your left arm extends outward, as if reaching for a more refined era. Silence, applause. Someone drops a hat in awe. Someone else begins to sob softly into their gloves. You are carried, to the refreshment table, where chilled rosewater and toothless biscuits await. You're placed beside a gentleman who claims to have once fainted before being startled. You nod with respect. Later that evening, the society bestows upon you its highest honor, the golden salts. A tiny vial of lavender-scented crystals mounted on a brooch to be worn during particularly taxing sermons or long-winded family dinners. You return home with a spring in your step and a slight limp in your dignity, both signs of an excellent day. Reginald draws your bath, room temperature naturally, and you soak in silence, reliving the applause, the descent, the glorious thud of relevance. Fainting, it turns out, is not merely an act of weakness. It is communication. It is punctuation. It is the ellipsis of the soul. And as you lower yourself into bed, wrapped in your robe, clutching your golden salts like a sleepy knight's medal, you smile. Tomorrow, you'll begin working on your next presentation, fainting in pairs when elegance meets coordination. But for now, you let yourself drift. Morning unfolds like a doily on a fainting couch, delicate, frilly, and largely unnecessary. You awaken to the sound of distant church bells and the soft, wheezing chirp of Reginald preparing breakfast. It's a blessed noise, like the kitchen itself is sighing in reverence. Today, your plans are spiritual. Not in the divine sense, heavens no, but in the very Victorian sense of spirituous engagement, a seance. You receive an invitation each month from Lady Prudence Flaxworthy, the reigning matron of the Spiritual Society of Subtle Tappings. Her parlor is legendary, a place of silk, shadows, and suspicious breezes. The ghosts, she insists, are mostly courteous and have excellent posture. As you dress, you consider whether the spirit world prefers silk or wool. You settle on your charcoal gray morning coat, it's never inappropriate, and a cravat patterned with tasteful question marks. You look like an unresolved mystery, which is thematically appropriate. On the way to the seance, your carriage hits a pothole and you nearly faint from surprise. You decide to practice your recovery glide, an essential skill for any spiritual gathering. Remember, ghosts may be ethereal, but that's no excuse for gracelessness. Lady Prudence's home smells of old perfume and existential dread. You're greeted by her butler, Mortimer, who might be alive, though no one's entirely sure. You nod respectfully. The seance circle is already forming. 10 chairs arranged around a table that looks like it regrets every secret it's heard. The participants include a viscount with a monocle so polished you can see your afterlife in it, a retired actress known for playing dying characters with such conviction that audiences once called an ambulance, and Reverend Charles Snod, a spiritual skeptic who attends only for the sandwiches. Lady Prudence herself enters in a gown made of whispering chiffon and dramatic pauses. She greets each guest by name and minor disappointment. "Ah, you've come," she says to you, as if surprised you still exist. The seance begins. The lights are dimmed to the exact level known as highly suggestible. Candles flicker. A breeze appears, despite all windows being sealed. Historians still argue whether Victorian seances were orchestrated frauds or simply high-concept performance art fueled by sherry and repressed grief. Lady Prudence calls upon the spirits. A few knocks. A whisper. The table trembles gently, like it just remembered an embarrassing memory. You, of course, are more interested in the etiquette of spiritual collapse. What happens if one faints mid-possession? Is it double occupancy? Should one apologize to the spirit for making it awkward? You consider these questions as the room grows chillier and the air thickens like day-old syllabub. Suddenly, the candles flicker violently. The table groans. Lady Prudence's eyes widen, not with fear, but anticipation. She declares that the spirit of Archibald Featherstone, a fainting coachman from 1847, has entered the room. "Do you wish to communicate?" she asks the void. A single knock. Then silence. Then your head grows light. Not just metaphorically. Your ears buzz with the sound of distant violinists practicing apologetically. Your fingers tingle. Your knees consider their options. You are fainting again, but not for show. This is genuine. This is authentic. This is transcendental collapse. You slide from your chair with all the grace of a reluctant snowflake. Your cravat flutters. Someone gasps. Reverend Snod drops a sandwich. As you recline on the floor, Half draped in shadow and curtain tassels, you hear Lady Prudence declare, "The spirit is channeling through him." Oh dear. You open one eye slightly. Lady Prudence has taken your hand. The others are leaning in. The table creaks dramatically, perhaps out of jealousy. You murmur something about the afterlife needing better lighting. The crowd gasps again. Mortimer bows solemnly and brings you a damp cloth and a biscuit, the Victorian equivalent of rebooting someone. Eventually, the séance ends with polite applause, a little weeping, and a firm reminder that next month's gathering will feature communicating through mutton fat candles. As you're helped to your feet, the retired actress whispers, "You were magnificent. I nearly fainted myself." You thank her. You consider inviting her to the next fainting workshop. Back at home, you reflect on the experience while Reginald prepares your slippers and your evening shawl. You sip chamomile tea and stare thoughtfully into your fireplace, which crackles like it knows too much. You jot a few notes in your journal. Spiritual fainting, risk of ghost cohabitation, how to tell if you've been temporarily possessed versus extremely tired. Can one faint into ectoplasm? Explore. You drift to bed slightly more translucent than usual. The séance was a success. You are now not only a connoisseur of conscious collapse, but possibly a medium. Or at least medium rare. Either way, you've expanded your repertoire, and possibly your address book, assuming ghosts send thank you notes. You wake up Monday to the scent of boiled starch and mild regret, signs that it's laundry day. In Victorian society, laundry is not merely a household chore. It's a social tightrope walked over a pit of damp undergarments and judgment. Your valet, Reginald, enters your chamber like a man carrying bad news in a folded napkin. He announces that today is not only laundry day, but also, brace yourself, inventory day for your fainting linens. You blink. You knew this moment would come. For the true gentleman, fainting linens are not optional. They are essential gear, like fencing swords or pocket flasks. These include fainting kerchiefs for the dramatic wrist drop, emergency chaise covers in case of unanticipated recline, collapse-compatible waistcoats, reinforced seams, extra give, and of course your prized descent blanket, hand-embroidered with the words temporarily unavailable. You follow Reginald to the linen cupboard, a cavernous armoire that smells of lavender, chalk, and bygone heartbreak. Together, you begin the audit. The first kerchief is a disaster. It's been scorched by a careless iron, now resembling something you'd wave in surrender, not delicacy. Into the discard pile it goes. Next comes your summer chaise cover. It's dotted with faint impressions of fainting. Reginald makes a note, recommend cold soak and firm prayer. You reach for a curious item, an old waistcoat with an elasticated spine. Experimental, Reginald murmurs, commissioned during your brief flirtation with acrobatics. You both pretend that summer never happened. By mid-morning, you've sorted your textiles by type, season, and emotional tone. There's melancholy cotton, wistful flannel, and a mysterious bolt of cloth labeled simply for collapsing in Italy. You set that one aside, just in case you ever spontaneously swoon abroad. As the laundry staff arrives, a minor crisis unfolds. A missing fainting shroud. Not just any shroud, the ceremonial one, used exclusively for public collapses with educational value. It was last seen at the Botanical Gardens, where you had fainted near a bee and were briefly mistaken for a sculpture. The staff searches high and low, including beneath the fainting ottoman and inside the oversympathetic umbrella stand. Reginald suspects a theft. You suspect you gave it away in a moment of post-swoon generosity. You've done stranger things. Like that time you donated your cravat to a nervous poet who needed inspiration. Eventually, the shroud is located in your travel trunk, wrapped around a copy of The Moral Implications of Reclining by Sir T. Puddlewit, a classic. The laundry team begins their careful process. Gentle soaps, whispered apologies to the fabric, and drying in filtered moonlight. Sunlight is too judgmental. One laundress, Miss Blemley, even claims that a fainting cloth folded with resentment will crease during collapse. You believe her. While the laundry simmers, you retreat to your writing desk and compose a letter to the Royal Institute of Domestic Pliability. You propose a new class of fabric, emotifiber, designed to wrinkle according to mood. Historians still debate whether mood-responsive fashion ever truly existed, but one can dream. Around midday, you visit the drying garden, where linens flutter like the dreams of sleepy flags. You admire your kerchiefs, now pristine and whisper light. A neighbor waves. You faint slightly, just to show appreciation. The grass catches you like an old friend. After tea, served with lemon, nostalgia, and a side of dry biscuits, you turn your attention to folding. Folding fainting linens is no simple affair. Each item must be creased exactly where you expect your body to fold. Reginald assists, guiding you into semi-reclined positions to map the trajectories. It's like yoga, but with more groaning and monocles. You finish with a triumphant snap of your final kerchief. The room smells of starch, achievement, and mild exhaustion. Laundry day is, as always, both physically draining and spiritually affirming. To reward yourself, you plan a feint on the library settee. You arrange the scene, a dropped book, a lukewarm tea, and a philosophical sigh. Just as you begin your descent, a visitor arrives. It's your cousin Horatio, known in the family for his refusal to faint under any circumstances. Stubborn, your aunt calls him. A liability, says Reginald. You rise, not quickly, but meaningfully. Horatio is loud, sunburnt, and devastatingly upright. I say, he booms, are you still carrying on with these fainting theatrics? You nod. Gravelly, he laughs. You faint. Not fully, just a half swoon. Enough to show finesse, but not enough to require recovery jam. Horatio mutters something about modern nonsense and leaves in a puff of masculine energy. Reginald returns with a ginger biscuit. Shall I add him to the list, sir? You nod again. The list is not for enemies. It's for people who interrupt collapses without permission. Evening falls. The linens are folded. The moon is waxing sympathetically, and your descent blanket is freshly fluffed. You stand by your window, watching fog roll in like a sleepy parade. Somewhere in the distance, a woman is fainting on a gazebo. You salute her with your teacup. Laundry day ends with you back in bed, surrounded by the silent choir of your textiles. Clean, crisp, and ready for drama. As you drift into sleep, you whisper, "There is no dignity in filth." And Reginald, outside the door, mutters softly, "That's why we rinse in lavender, sir." Tuesday is for travel. Not a grand tour of Europe, heavens no. Just a short jaunt to the countryside manor of your dear friend Algernon Swivelsworth. He's hosting what the invitation calls a repose and recumbency retreat, which is code for a long weekend of gentle swooning, competitive lounging, and probably someone fainting near a croquet wicket. You begin your day with a light breakfast, a poached egg, a single toast triangle, and 3 slices of melodrama. Reginald packs your fainting essentials into the travel valise. 2 collapsed kerchiefs, 1 backup cravat, peppermint lozenges for post-swoon refreshment, and, just in case, a mini chaise longue that folds into a walking stick. As you wait for the carriage, you consult your travel list. Smelling salts? Yes. Dramatic memoir for reading aloud during thunderstorms? Naturally. Emergency poetic metaphor kit? Checked. The journey to the countryside is uneventful, unless you count the moment a squirrel startled the horses and you fainted into a basket of muffins. Reginald insists it was the bump in the road, but you know an omen when you see one. And squirrels, as you've long suspected, are judgmental creatures. Swivelsworth Manor appears through the morning mist like a dream someone tried to forget. It's all ivy, chimneys, and windows that probably sigh. Algernon himself greets you at the gate, resplendent in a robe that suggests both retirement and unfinished novels. "Glad you came," he says. "We've had 2 swoons, a mild recline, and a chaise incident. And it's not even noon." You feel instantly at home. The retreat's attendees are a medley of gentlefolk, artists, amateur nap theorists, and at least one spiritualist with a raven on her shoulder. Her name is Euphemia, and she claims the raven, Bartholomew, faints whenever exposed to vulgar French. You believe her. The retreat schedule is posted in calligraphy on a velvet board. 11, dramatic readings while reclining. 13, al fresco fainting workshop, weather permitting. 1500, tea and tonic for nervous constitutions. 1700, optional sighing circle. Algernon leads you on a tour of the manor. There are fainting couches in every room, and even the stairs have polite cushions. The library includes a prone reading nook, designed for those who collapse mid-sonnet. You arrive at your room, high ceilings, low lighting, and a view of the hedge maze. A fainting bell hangs by the bedside, to summon staff in the event of a sudden swoon. You test it. It rings with a charming despondency. After unpacking, you join the others on the East Lawn for the al fresco fainting workshop. It's hosted by Madame Bellamy, a former stage actress who now teaches posture-based vulnerability. First, she declares, you must let the collapse begin in your shoulders, never the knees. They panic. She demonstrates with such grace that a passing robin faints midair. You follow along, your form somewhere between tragic hero and disillusioned poet. Madame Bellamy nods approvingly. Yes, that's it. Faint like you've just realized your love was unreciprocated and the bakery is closed. The group applauds quietly. You partner with a baronet named Clive for the catch and cradle drill. The idea is to faint toward a fellow gentleman in synchronized sympathy. Clive misses. You land in a shrubbery shaped like a question mark. It's oddly comfortable. After a quick restorative biscuit, the group regathers for tea and tonic. You sip a blend designed for emotional regulation and dramatic flair, served with lemon slices shaped like Victorian regrets. There's idle chatter about swooning techniques, heirloom chaise cushions, and the current scandal involving a duchess who collapsed during her own wedding, twice. Some say it was nerves, others suspect performance art. Historians still debate whether these retreats were genuine social wellness events or a performative rebellion against industrial efficiency. Certainly, no one here appears to be in a hurry. Even the cat seems to nap with intention. After tea, Euphemia shares that Bartholomew the Raven has fainted in response to someone's pocket dictionary containing the phrase, amour fou. The group murmurs respectfully. As the sun begins to retreat like a bashful guest, the sighing circle forms. Everyone sits on plush cushions under a wisteria arch and shares their most melodramatic exhalations. You listen to Algernon's, long, wistful, a touch citrusy. Clive's is shorter, more abrupt, a man wrestling with his own expectations. Your sigh is well received. Euphemia dabs her eyes. Someone writes it down. Nightfall wraps the manor in its shawl. You return to your room and admire the turned-down service, your bed arranged for optimal collapse, your slippers warmed by indirect proximity to someone else's fireplace. You undress with the solemnity of a man removing the weight of society's expectations, one button at a time. You place your kerchief on the nightstand and tuck a small fainting chart under your pillow, just in case. As you drift off, you hear faint music from the parlor. Perhaps someone fainted near the piano again. You smile. This retreat may not cure your fainting tendencies, but it reminds you why you never want to. You awaken to the scent of lavender, toast, and unresolved yearning. Morning at Swivelsworth Manor is not so much announced as implied. Filtered sunlight trickles in through lace curtains, and somewhere in the halls, someone is fainting to avoid the breakfast conversation. You rise slowly, like a Victorian souffle afraid of commitment, and summon Reginald with a gentle tug of the fainting bell. He appears with your dressing gown, a slight nod, and a knowing glance that says, "Let's not talk about last night's sighing circle." You dress for breakfast, loosely buttoned shirt, house trousers, and a fainting cravat tied in what Reginald calls the wistful librarian knot. Today's agenda? A local antiquities auction. Algernon, ever the enthusiastic host, has arranged carriages to take the retreat guests to a nearby village known for its suspiciously inexpensive heirlooms and a tea shop where the scones remind one of missed opportunities. The carriage ride is smooth until Euphemia's raven, Bartholomew, becomes agitated by an over-enthusiastic turnip vendor. You fan yourself nervously, uncertain whether you are swooning due to Bartholomew's shrieking or the existential implications of a turnip sold with that much passion. At the village square, the auction is already underway. A man with mutton chops and the voice of a tired foghorn is calling out the latest lot. One set of slightly scorched opera gloves, provenance unknown but deeply hinted at. Your group settles in. Algernon is fixated on a dented monocle said to have survived a faint in the presence of Queen Victoria. Euphemia is bidding on a chaise once owned by a woman who reportedly fainted at her own reflection, twice. You find yourself drawn to a dusty box labeled Assorted Tools of Emotional Expression. Inside, a gently used swooning corset, a feathered fan rumored to detect dishonesty, and a smelling salts bottle shaped like a weeping cherub. You bid instinctively. Reginald leans in. "Sir, that's a generous offer for a box that appears to weep." You raise your bid. You win. The auctioneer thanks you in a tone suggesting mild concern for your emotional stability. As the group disperses for tea, you carry your new box like a proud historian of feelings. The tea shop is small, crooked, and smells of bergamot and regret. You take your seat under a framed print that reads, "Please do not faint near the fireplace." It startles the embers. Tea arrives. It's strong, floral, and presented in cups clearly chosen for their tendency to tip. You sip cautiously. Algernon regales the table with tales of an ancestral aunt who once swooned while riding side saddle. She slid off the horse like a doily from a sloped mantelpiece. Euphemia, meanwhile, is explaining her theory that fainting may in fact be ancestral memory reasserting itself. "We don't collapse," she insists. "We remember collapsing." Historians still argue whether these sorts of retreats marked a genuine resistance to progress or were merely excuses for the upper class to nap without consequence. You lean toward the former, mostly because it's easier to nap when you believe in something. After tea, the group returns to the manor. You retire briefly to your room to examine your box of emotional artifacts. The fan, when opened, makes a soft humph sound. You're fairly sure it's haunted by someone deeply passive-aggressive. The smelling salts are still potent. Reginald briefly loses balance after a test sniff. "That'll bring back memories I haven't had yet, sir." You place the swooning corset gently on a chair. It looks like it's thinking about something tragic. Evening brings a surprise guest to the manor. Professor Alabaster Grimsby, author of The Collapse of Decorum, Fainting as Social Commentary. He arrives with a leather satchel, a folding stool, and a nervous twitch. Dinner is formal. Everyone dresses in their finest faint-capable ensembles. You wear a vest with extra breathability and a pocket sewn specifically for regret. Grimsby gives an after-dinner talk in the salon, standing nervously by a chalkboard labeled The Arc of Collapse. He draws a curve that begins with initial alarm, peaks at public concern, and ends with smelling salt-based catharsis. The room is silent, entranced, or perhaps everyone is just too full to move. He continues, "A true Victorian faint is never just a faint. It is gesture, performance, coded protest." He taps the chalkboard. "We collapse not because we are weak, but because standing up all the time is terribly tedious." You nod, impressed. Grimsby produces a replica of a fainting couch and demonstrates what he calls the triple fold. It's part art, part collapse, and wholly convincing. Half the room applauds. The other half is gently horizontal. As the evening wanes, Algernon approaches and whispers, "You must try it, old chap, the triple fold. It's the thing this season." So you do. With Reginald ready and your descent blanket folded nearby, you channel every social anxiety, every awkward handshake, every slightly understeeped cup of tea. And then gracefully you fold, once at the shoulders, then the waist, then knees. The world blurs. Gasps rise. You land on the couch like a poem that ends mid-sentence. For a moment, silence, then thunderous, polite applause. Someone fans you with a menu. Euphemia gives you a single nod of approval. Even Bartholomew flutters his wings in restrained admiration. You sit up, smile, and mouth the words, "I needed that." The night ends with firelight and soft murmurs. Professor Grimsby collapses mid-sentence, possibly from emotion or indigestion. Algernon reads from a book with no punctuation. And you, now curled in a chair like a sleepy question mark, think quietly to yourself, "We are all, in the end, just trying to fall gracefully." Dawn arrives like a butler who knows you're not quite ready, gently knocking, softly clearing its throat, offering sunlight filtered through the thick Victorian fog of countryside air and repressed emotions. You stir in your bed, wrapped in the folds of dreams involving antique chaise lounges and an inexplicable waltz with a monocle. Reginald, ever a master of tactful awakenings, appears with your morning tray. Tea, toast, and a single, tragic letter from a fan of your most recent swoon. Yes, word of last night's triple fold has spread like marmalade on toast. Algernon has left a congratulatory note in violet ink. You fell as if falling itself were a kind of hope. Bravo. After your modest ablutions, which include a brief conversation with the mirror about your emotional availability, you descend to breakfast. Today's topic of discussion? Victorian therapies. Algernon, seated beneath a painting of a man aggressively reclining, explains that today's retreat activity will include demonstrations of once fashionable nervous system remedies. Euphemia adds, and we'll explore leeches, magnets, and the healing power of judgy stares. The breakfast buffet features calming fare, boiled eggs, melancholy muffins, and troubled jam, which seems to consist mostly of plums and generational shame. Once fortified, the group gathers in the conservatory for the morning demonstration. Madame Bellamy has set up a therapy salon, complete with drapes, chaise longues, and a discreet corner for those who faint merely at the idea of leeches. The first treatment on display is electrotherapy, a darling of Victorian medicine that involves mild electric pulses delivered to various extremities. Algernon volunteers with the enthusiasm of a man who once accidentally electrocuted a hat and called it art. Two dapper assistants, named Octavius and Edwin, because of course, carefully attach leads to his wrists. A low hum fills the air. Algernon twitches once, then declares, "I feel a bit like a morally confused pigeon." Polite applause. You step forward, more out of curiosity than courage. The electrodes are cool against your skin, the sensation oddly fizzy. It doesn't exactly revive your spirits, but it does remind you of your aunt's gooseberry sherry and the time you fainted into a hat box. Reginald quietly takes notes on your reaction, presumably to log in your personal index of collapse triggers. The next station is magnetotherapy, a treatment that involves being surrounded by magnetized objects while thinking calming thoughts. You sit in a chair surrounded by magnetic slippers, belts, and what may be a fork that once belonged to Isaac Newton. Now, Madame Bellamy says, envision yourself as a compass needle, desperately seeking north, but also just tired. You do your best. You feel no particular change, but Euphemia insists your aura is pulsing with at least 3 extra laments. Historians still argue whether these therapies had any real physiological effect or were simply elaborate excuses for upper-class napping with accessories. Evidence leans toward the latter, but the experience does have a certain charm, especially when accompanied by someone fanning you with a monogrammed menu. Then comes the leeching demonstration. A hush falls. The room divides. Those who faint at the idea, those who faint at the sight, and a small, enthusiastic subgroup who faint toward the leech handler in an attempt to make a statement. The leech specialist, an unnervingly calm woman named Thistle, produces a velvet pouch and reveals the day's stars. 2 sleepy leeches named Balthazar and Kevin. She assures you they are well-fed and specialize in melancholic humors. Algernon, never one to resist a medical fad, volunteers again. Thistle applies Kevin gently to his wrist. Algernon smiles faintly and murmurs, "He tickles," like an emotionally stunted raccoon. You decide to skip the leeches. Reginald mouths, "Thank you," from across the room. After the therapies, everyone moves to the solarium for reflection time. Journals are distributed, hand-bound, naturally, and you jot down the morning's highlights. Electric tingles equals 6/10. Magnets equals confusing but oddly affirming. Leeches, still not over the incident with my uncle's pond. Algernon reads aloud from his own journal. Today I met myself halfway between dignity and dampness. We exchanged cards. You spend the afternoon in light conversation and heavy cushions. Euphemia is arguing with Bartholomew the Raven, who has taken offense at a misquoted French proverb. You offer him a sugar cube and a kind word. He snubs you. That's ravens for you. Dinner that evening is themed Feasts of the Fractured Nerve. Each dish is inspired by a Victorian remedy. There's chamomile stew, valerian root pudding, and an aspic molded in the shape of Freud's disapproval. You're not sure if it's meant to soothe or unsettle, but either way, it jiggles judgmentally. During dessert, lavender trifle with edible regret, you find yourself seated next to Professor Grimsby. He's sketching new diagrams for his next lecture, Collapse as Communication. You see, he says, gesturing with his spoon, the faint isn't a retreat, it's punctuation. It's the Victorian semicolon. A pause that says, I'm not done yet, but I need a lie down. You nod. That makes far more sense than most punctuation guides. The conversation drifts. Someone plays a mournful sonata on the manor piano. Euphemia declares it reminds her of a man she once forgot to marry. Bartholomew faints quietly into a bowl of almonds. As the guests prepare for bed, you take one last look at the moonlit garden. Somewhere, a breeze nudges a swing. You imagine it sighing. Reginald has turned down your bed with fainting mints and a page of poetry clipped from an old journal. Let the world spin on, it says, while you spin slowly inward. You exhale. You turn off the light. And as you drift, you wonder, not for the first time, whether there's strength in the soft refusal, in the collapse, in the courage it takes to simply lie down in a world that always demands standing. You awaken to the sound of rain tapping the window pane like a gentleman with unresolved feelings. Persistent, poetic, and just a little overdramatic. The manor smells of toasted oats and soft wool, the aroma curling through the hallways like a fog with good posture. Reginald appears at your door with a breakfast tray and a single pressed flower on the napkin. For the memory, he says, or the melancholy, whichever you're running lower on. Today's program, as the embroidered schedule insists, is titled The Social Performance of Collapsing: How to Swoon in a Crowd. Euphemia summarizes it more succinctly over morning tea. Basically, how to faint without making it about you, but still winning. The lesson begins in the drawing room, which has been artfully cluttered with fainting couches of varying dramatic potential. Madame Bellamy stands beneath a fresco of someone falling down a staircase with theatrical flair. She explains that Victorian society demanded one master two conflicting arts, subtlety and spectacle. You must appear overwhelmed, she intones, but also vaguely admirable, like someone who's read too many tragic novels and takes their tea with ghost stories. You're divided into trios for the morning exercise. Your task? Perform a group faint at a fictional garden party where someone's revealed they once wore linen after Michaelmas. Gasps ripple through the room. You take your place next to Algernon and Euphemia. At Madame Bellamy's cue, a scandalous announcement is made. Lady Clarabelle owns a dog that is neither small nor poetic. You stagger first, one hand to the forehead, the other clutching a rose. Euphemia follows, collapsing onto a velvet cushion with the sort of precision only heartbreak and fencing lessons can teach. Algernon, not to be outdone, simply mutters, "I am overcome," and sinks gently into a potted fern. Applause. Professor Grimsby observes with a monocle so large it might also qualify as a portal. He remarks, "Splendid synchronization. Euphemia, your crumple had excellent narrative arc." Historians still debate whether fainting in Victorian society was truly spontaneous or a cultivated signal, an act of resistance, boredom, or simply a heat wave under too many corsets. Diaries from the era suggest it may have often been equal parts discomfort and drama, a strategic pause in a room that wouldn't let certain people speak their minds. Before lunch, you're invited to participate in a simulation called Tea Gone Terribly Wrong. The scenario: you are served the wrong blend. You must decide whether to faint forward, sideways, or in protest. You choose sideways, into a cushion embroidered with Byron's most despairing quote. The results are praised for their nuance. After a lunch of conflict sandwiches, thinly sliced turkey and unresolved sibling tension, and bergamot biscuits, the group gathers for the highlight of the day, the faint-off tournament. The rules are simple. You must swoon 3 times, each in a different setting. Judges will score based on originality, historical plausibility, and audible pathos. Euphemia reads the criteria like a sports announcer with a PhD in Gothic regret. Round 1, the library swoon. You collapse at the shocking realization that someone has filed Lord Tennyson under humor. You trip over a footstool, manage a slow-motion fall, and murmur, "Oh, the alphabet has betrayed me." Grimsby gives you a 9. Euphemia holds up a 10 shaped like a teardrop. Round 2, the garden path collapse. Euphemia faints against a trellis. Algernon uses a wheelbarrow for effect. You opt for an elegant stagger into a rosebush while quoting Shelley. Bartholomew the Raven nods in solemn approval. Final round, the staircase descent into melancholy. You float downward, clutching a letter you've never sent. Reginald meets you halfway with a lemon-scented handkerchief. By unanimous decision, you win the silver cravat of delicate defeat. The prize ceremony is as understated as possible. Euphemia places the cravat around your neck with a whispered, "Use it wisely." Madame Bellamy sheds a single, symmetrical tear. As evening falls, you gather in the parlor. Someone plays a haunting tune on the harp. Bartholomew attempts harmony, but ends up sounding like a foghorn in mourning. You sit by the fire, the silver cravat resting lightly around your collarbone. Algernon remarks, "It suits you. You look like a poet who just got bad news from a seashell." The conversation turns to the legacy of fainting. Madame Bellamy muses, "In the end, the collapse was never about weakness. It was about softness in a hard world. About saying, 'I've had quite enough, thank you.'" You nod. It makes sense, like using a full stop where the world insists on an ellipsis. Later that night, as you return to your chamber, Reginald offers you a foot bath and a question. Do you think you'll continue this art? Outside the manor, I mean? You pause. Consider. There may not be many drawing rooms left in the world, but there are still plenty of moments worth fainting from. Tax forms, X's at the post office, news headlines. Maybe, you say, but perhaps I'll faint inward now. Reginald gives the smallest smile. Ah, the most graceful collapse of all. You drift to sleep with the cravat on your nightstand, a token of your triumph. The rain sings softly. Your heartbeat slows. Somewhere a chair sighs with relief at not having to catch you tonight. Though it's Bartholomew the Raven attempting a duet with a finch and insisting quite loudly that he does not harmonize below his range. The manner is quiet, like the pause before a sigh. You stretch luxuriously, limbs still sore from yesterday's triple swoon and that overly emotional tea incident. Reginald, who you suspect hasn't actually slept all week, glides in bearing your slippers, a lavender-scented waistcoat, and the morning paper folded to avoid all unpleasant news. He lays out your schedule for the day in a tone that suggests both deep admiration and a light emotional exhaustion. Today, he intones gently, we approach the finale of your training, the societal deployment of the controlled collapse. He places a dainty, handwritten itinerary on your breakfast tray. Public spaces, private weaknesses, navigating the outside world without standing up for too long. After your tea, which tastes faintly of nostalgia and unresolved correspondence, you meet the others in the manor's vestibule. Madame Bellamy awaits, dressed in full travel attire, with a parasol that may also double as a fencing foil. Ladies, gentlemen, and birds of dramatic inclination, she begins, today we journey into the village. Your task is simple. Walk among the ordinary, react as extraordinary, and faint should the need arise with grace, timing, and a strategic awareness of upholstery. Yes, dear listener, the fainting field trip has arrived. You're assigned to a trio once more. Yourself, Euphemia, who's brought smelling salts and a political grudge, and Algernon, who's wearing gloves embroidered with might collapse in italic thread. The village is sleepy, cobblestoned, and utterly unprepared. Your first stop is the hat shop. Euphemia gasps aloud at a bonnet so underdecorated it borders on criminal. You follow her lead, clutching a hat pin as though it's pierced your very soul. The shopkeeper, used to such scenes, merely nods and brings out a fainting footstool. Historians still debate the legitimacy of these public swoons. Were they genuine, performative, or both? A well-timed faint in a shop could delay a debt, invite pity, or avoid an awkward question about one's lineage. Scholars agree on one point. Victorians fainted as much for effect as for relief. In the bakery, Algernon lingers too long by the shortbread display and announces, I have tasted a biscuit so dry, it has drained me of hope. He sinks into a sack of flour, which is later sold at a premium as emotional pastry dust. Next comes the apothecary. You drift dramatically past shelves of medicinal herbs, picking up a jar of tincture labeled mild despair. Take with opera. You place a single drop on your wrist, sniff, and crumple softly into a pile of lavender sachets. Euphemia fans you while casually asking for a discount on cough drops. The local constable, used to this crowd, doffs his cap and mutters, retreat in good health. You nod weakly. It's the most Victorian police interaction possible. You stop at a cafe, outdoor seating only, where Algernon attempts to order something frothy with internal conflict. The waiter brings him warm milk. He downs it, sighs, and pretends to faint out of gratitude. Bartholomew, watching from a windowsill, croaks dramatic and attempts to fake his own collapse into a sugar bowl. The final test is at the town square. A brass band begins playing something vaguely martial. Madame Bellamy signals with her parasol. Time for the grand public swoon. You take your place beneath a lamppost. A crowd gathers. Townsfolk, curious tourists, one suspiciously alert terrier. Euphemia reads a poem aloud. Algernon recites a haiku about socks. Then you, gently, tragically, allow your knees to buckle, your shoulders to wilt, and your head to tilt just so. You land, gracefully, against a crate of apples. One rolls dramatically into the gutter. Applause. Actual applause. A small child asks, Mummy, is that person okay? Her mother replies, that's just art, darling. And there it is, the line between calamity and culture. You've crossed it like a Victorian tightrope walker with excellent posture and a bladder full of mint tea. Back at the manor, everyone is beaming. Euphemia gifts you a brooch shaped like a chaise lounge. Algernon signs your cravat. To my favorite faller, yours in perpetual near collapse. Professor Grimsby delivers a brief speech. In you, he says, we've seen a return to form, a rejection of urgency, a bodily reminder that no one ever solved a crisis standing up. Madame Bellamy gives you a diploma tied with ribbon. It reads, Certified in Victorian Collapse, Public, Private, and Poetic. You pin it above your bed. That night, you rest easy. Your limbs remember each fall, each cushion, each odd look from a leech. You've made it through the fainting retreat, not just intact, but renewed, like a flannel reborn into an ascot. Reginald leaves a note on your pillow. Tomorrow, perhaps, we rise slowly. The manor wakes with the hush of finality, like a velvet curtain closing slowly on the world's most dramatic, but politely restrained play. The scent of toasted crumpets and melancholy wafts through the corridors. A mourning dove coos outside your window, clearly aware that your time at the fainting retreat is drawing to its end. Reginald brings breakfast on a tray shaped like a chaise lounge. Your teacup bears the message, today's the day. Try not to collapse too soon. You're dressed in your softest cravat, the one embroidered with tiny question marks. Euphemia knocks gently and enters with a box of farewell gifts, and a look that says she may, at any moment, declare a tragic emotion and drop gracefully to the floor. Today, she whispers, we graduate. After breakfast, you and the others gather in the grand salon, a room that seems to sigh under the weight of its own history. Madame Bellamy stands beside a harp draped in ivy, wearing gloves of black lace and pride. Professor Grimsby adjusts his spectacles with the solemnity of someone announcing that yes, there will be cucumber sandwiches. Graduation, he begins, is not a rising. It is a gentle descent into what comes next. Your final assessment will take place in the reflection garden, a curiously rectangular meadow bordered by topiary hedges trimmed into the shapes of noble collapses. One bush resembles Lord Byron slumped across a chair. Another depicts a fainting goat in mid-swoon. The test? One final feint, performed entirely alone, at the precise location of your choosing, with nothing but your body, your training, and the approval of one raven perched dramatically on a bust of Queen Victoria. The others go first. Euphemia chooses the rose arbor, whispering farewell to each petal before allowing herself to tumble delicately into a bed of moss. Algernon selects a marble bench and falls with the kind of restraint that says, I regret everything, but I shan't elaborate. When it's your turn, you wander the garden, searching for the right patch of grass upon which to surrender to the moment. You settle beneath a weeping willow that appears to have gone through several intense novels and one very bad breakup. You sit, breathe, let the breeze find your collarbone. Then slowly, deliberately, you recline, one hand over your chest, the other trailing a single daisy to the ground. You think of all you've learned, the precise tilt of the head, the rhythm of a well-timed sigh, the poetry in surrender. And you faint. Not just bodily, but emotionally, symbolically. A full collapse into everything soft and absurd. Bartholomew lets out a low cry, which you choose to interpret as applause. Historians still debate whether the Victorian obsession with fainting was driven by cultural expectation, medical misbelief, or an elaborate protest against corsets, capitalism, and overly bright wallpaper. Most agree that to faint was not to give up, but to opt out, if only briefly. A small theatrical pause in a world that never stops talking. As you lie there in the grass, a memory floats up of your first arrival, wide-eyed and uncertain, barely able to fall convincingly onto a sofa without flinching. Now you are a practiced professional in dignified disintegration. Later, back in the manor, everyone gathers for the final ceremony. You're each presented with a certificate, a fainting fan monogrammed with your initials, and a linen-bound journal titled Posture and Pathos, a guide for the modern melancholic. Professor Grimsby gives you a knowing look. Go out into the world, he says, and collapse with intention. Madame Bellamy kisses you once on each cheek, which for her is tantamount to doing cartwheels. She whispers, you fell beautifully. Remember, never fall the same way twice. You spend your last afternoon in the manor's conservatory, sipping cardamom tea and composing your first entry in your new journal. Today, I graduated. Not with fanfare, but with a hush. I left a fainting shadow on the grass and took a deeper breath than I thought I was allowed to. I feel, not lighter, but slower. And maybe that's better. That night, the manor throws a farewell collapse gala. Everyone dresses in their fainting best. Euphemia wears a skirt with a built-in pillow bustle. Algernon arrives already in mid-swoon, carried in on a chaise like a defeated yet smug Roman senator. The highlight of the evening is the group fainting waltz. Partners sway, swoon, and catch one another in choreographed collapse. Bartholomew swoops through the chandeliers, cawing encouragement and shedding a single molted feather onto Madame Bellamy's updo. You find Reginald near the punch bowl, looking quietly proud. I suspect the outside world may not appreciate the art you now carry, he says, but never let that stop you. Collapse where you must, even if it's just metaphorical. You promise him you will. The night ends as all great nights do, with quiet laughter, a full moon, and the creak of overused fainting couches. You step onto the veranda one last time. The stars look like distant corset buttons. Tomorrow you leave. But tonight, you fall gently into a final dream. Morning drapes itself softly over the manor like a well-worn shawl. The sky is misted with that peculiar English gray that makes everything feel half-dreamt, and you, seasoned graduate of collapse, awaken with an unfamiliar feeling, readiness. Your bags are packed, your cravats folded crisply with melancholic precision. Your journal, now several pages in, rests atop a neatly coiled belt that never once cinched your waist too tightly. Because you learned, in time, that restraint can be aesthetic, not orthopedic. Reginald appears beside you like a butler-shaped ghost, holding a tray with a single scone and a note card that reads, "Scone for the road, collapsing optional, but recommended near luggage handlers." You give him a look that says thank you, and also please don't iron my socks after I'm gone, but you know he will anyway, out of ritual. Downstairs, the final farewells have begun. Euphemia clutches a lace handkerchief as if it owes her rent. "I shall never again faint with such poetry," she declares, then immediately stumbles into Algernon's arms, who catches her with a flourish that nearly upends a fern. You are last to receive your send-off. Madame Bellamy approaches, wearing her ceremonial hat, a towering black thing adorned with feathers, gilt, and minor regrets. "You," she says, placing a gloved hand on your shoulder, "are no longer a visitor in the world of refined frailty. You are its torchbearer, or more accurately, its faintly flickering lantern." She kisses your cheek, pauses dramatically, and adds, "Go forth and wilt beautifully." She turns on her heel and disappears into a curtain. You suspect she lives behind it. The carriage awaits outside, flanked by topiary hedges shaped like past graduates. One shrub resembles someone you vaguely recall from your first week. Mildred, perhaps, who once fainted during embroidery because someone stitched a lemon upside down. You step into the carriage and sink back onto the cushion. It sighs with you, as if understanding that this is the beginning of a new chapter, written in long pauses and powdered sighs. As the manor recedes into the trees, you reflect. This was never just about fainting. It was about learning how to let go in a world that demands constant uprightness. It was about giving in, gently, to the unbearable heaviness of being, and doing so in a way that felt almost stylish. You pass familiar scenes. The hedgerow where Euphemia once dramatically renounced dairy, the pond where Algernon recited poetry to a duck, the field where you first collapsed unconvincingly onto a rock and walked away with both shame and a bruise shaped like Queen Victoria's profile. Historians still argue whether fainting schools truly existed in this form. Some claim they were metaphors. Others insist there were actual salons where the art of collapse was refined to near martial discipline. But everyone agrees. The Victorians knew how to dramatize discomfort like no one else. As you ride, you begin imagining how this training will serve you in the real world. At dinner parties, when conversations veer into politics or poorly cooked beef, you shall simply clutch your collar, sigh heavily, and recline into an ottoman with both conviction and plausible deniability. At work, when emails arrive marked urgent, you will respond with a gentle slump and perhaps a faintly murmured, "not in this cravat's lifetime." In relationships, you shall love deeply, but with the understanding that sometimes the best way to express longing is to fall softly onto a window seat while staring at the rain. You arrive at the train station, and even the conductor seems unusually understanding as you execute a minor swoon while stepping aboard. He nods respectfully and hands you a mint. Fainting class? He asks. You incline your head. He's clearly seen your kind before. You take your seat in the carriage, surrounded by strangers unaware that they are traveling beside a certified master of emotional gravity. You flip open your journal. They say to live is to suffer, but I've learned it can also be to sag, sigh, and slump, beautifully, purposefully, with just enough flair to let the world know, yes, I am overwhelmed, but I have monogrammed handkerchiefs to deal with it. A child across the aisle points at you and whispers to their parent, that person looks like they fell out of a poem. The parent nods solemnly. That's the best kind of person to be. You smile, not because it's expected, but because it's earned. As the train pulls away from the countryside, leaving behind the lavender fields and fainting benches, you know this. The world may try to rush you, shake you, stand you upright, but you have a secret weapon. You know how to fall and rise on your own time. You arrive in the city just past twilight, where the gas lamps glow like thoughtful commas in an otherwise rushed sentence. Everything here moves faster. Heels click with urgency. Handsome cabs trundle with purpose, and no one is leaning against a lamppost for the sheer poetry of it. But you? You step into this whirling bustle with the poise of someone who knows exactly how to fall. Gracefully, strategically, and without tearing their trousers. Your new lodgings are modest but agreeable. There's a fainting settee by the window, an encouraging omen, 3 decorative pillows of uncertain purpose, and a bell pull labeled, in case of emotional emergency. The landlady, a brisk woman named Mrs. Tilling, eyes your embroidered trunk with curiosity. You some kind of furniture critic? She asks. You smile and say, only when the furniture fails to catch me. You begin your new life quietly. Morning strolls, afternoons with books, evenings of people watching, and discreet swooning in public gardens. And soon enough, your reputation begins to form. Not loudly, but with the whispery persistence of steam from a teacup. They start calling you the reclining stranger. At cafes, people glance over just in time to see you sigh delicately into your cup, as if the weight of the Earl Grey is almost too much. In galleries, you're the one who stands too long before the weeping saints and then collapses slowly onto the nearest bench. And at the park, children dare one another to get close to the human poetry person who sometimes pretends to faint near the swan pond. You are a one-person rebellion against urgency. Historians still debate whether Victorian society truly valued fragility, or whether they simply tolerated it when wrapped in velvet. But here, in your quietly slouching existence, you've discovered its true purpose, to remind others that rest can be radiant. One afternoon, you find yourself invited to a salon, a modern sort, full of people with loud opinions and louder shoes. You attend, swathed in gentle pastels and carrying your fainting fan in a cane holster. The room hushes when you arrive, not because you're famous, but because you seem slower. Not sluggish, intentional. People make space for you on the divan. Someone offers you a glass of elderflower cordial without speaking. A woman in trousers with opinions about Nietzsche asks if you've ever considered performance art. You tilt your head. Every collapse is performance art. That night, back in your room, you make another journal entry. Fainting, I now see, was never about weakness. It was about reclaiming time in a world that demanded posture. It was a nap disguised as protest, a sigh wrapped in choreography. I no longer collapse for applause. I collapse because it's Tuesday, and the air is emotionally complex. One day, while lounging at the museum on your usual chaise in the pre-Raphaelite wing, a curator approaches. We've had inquiries, she says. People think you're part of the installation. You raise one eyebrow with imperial disinterest. She adds, would you like to be? Thus begins your short-lived but much photographed career as a living diorama in the exhibit. Melancholia and lace, interiors of the Victorian mind. Tourists lean in, schoolchildren giggle, and you, gently draped across a velvet love seat, think to yourself, Madame Bellamy would be scandalously proud. You retire from the museum life before it becomes passé, and instead take up fainting mentorship. Twice a week, you hold a private circle in the back of a stationery shop. The delicate society, they call it. You sip rose water and practice safe collapses among fellow aesthetes who've had quite enough of ambition. And somewhere along the line, you fall in love. Not dramatically, not instantly, but with the kind of slow, leaning fondness that sneaks in when someone starts catching you before you even realize you're swooning. They say, "You always look like you're about to say something tragic in French." You say, "That's just my normal face." They laugh. You pretend to faint. They catch you. And you both stay there on the floor for a bit longer than necessary. Your story doesn't end with fireworks. It ends with a sigh. A soft one. The kind that escapes your lips as you curl beneath a wool blanket, a cup of tea cooling beside you, and the distant hum of the city saying, "Sleep, you strange, reclining thing." You have become something rare in this world. Someone who knows how to stop. And for that, you are never hurried, never pushed, never fully upright. You're just enough. And now, dear listener, let's slow it all down. Wind down. The room you're in begins to soften. The edges blur like watercolors at rest. The world outside fades to a low, distant hush, like a memory wrapped in velvet. You lie back, slowly, and the cushions beneath you seem to sigh. Your breath follows suit. In and out. Easy, unhurried, like waves that don't care when they arrive. You are warm, you are safe. Nothing needs your attention. Not now. Not for a little while. The clock still ticks, but it doesn't chase you. The to-do list has folded itself into a paper swan and drifted gently out the window. Your thoughts, once buzzing like overexcited bees at a picnic, are now dozing beneath lilac leaves. Even your muscles, those earnest little things that always wanted to help, are taking the night off. There is no urgency here, no sudden movements, no sharp words, just the slow pull of gravity, the soft weight of being still. You are allowed to rest, not because you earned it, not because it's the end of something, but because you are, simply, human. And humans, especially the poetic ones, need stillness. So go ahead, let go of the day, let your body sink a little deeper, let your mind dim its lamps one by one. You are already halfway to dreaming, and dreams, my dear reclining friend, are just another form of fainting, only with better lighting. Good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.